Hey everybody, I'm here today with Jodi Shaw and Colin Wright, and I'm very excited to bring these two together. I've interviewed them both individually. So hey guys, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Sasha.
Um, so I'll just start by giving a brief background on your guys' story so that you don't have to rehash the whole thing. I know it can get a little repetitive. You both do a lot of interviews, but just so people know in case they don't know the background, so they're not dropping in unaware. So Colin Wright is an evolutionary biologist who got his PhD from UC Santa Barbara in 2018 before taking a postdoc position at Penn State. But when he published an article in Quillette called The New Evolution Deniers about biological sex being denied right now, he was the subject of an online harassment campaign by basically woke activists or people who thought that he shouldn't be in academia, and he ended up leaving academia and is now a managing editor at Quillette. And Jodi is a former staff member in the Department of Residence Life at Smith College in Massachusetts, which is a women's university and also her alma mater. After an incident at Smith College when campus security was called on a student who was in the wrong place and also happened to be Black, the atmosphere at Smith became one of immense racial tension and blaming going around, and staff was subjected to this racial bias training where they had to confess their white privilege and whatnot. And Jodi, in particular, dealt with racial discrimination and ended up leaving Smith, denying a settlement from the university, and has been very vocal about it ever since. So correct me if I got anything wrong there, guys.
That was a good Reader's Digest version of mine for sure.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, good.
So to start off with, we have a lot to talk about because both of you guys are interested in both critical race theory and also gender critical stuff. So I thought we could talk about, all of that and kind of bring it together. To start off with, Jodi, can you just tell us, update us, what have you been up to lately?
Oh,
If you can.
yeah. I've been really doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff, connecting people. Um, one thing I'm doing is I'm working with Counterweight in the UK. It's a UK based organization, but it helps people from all over the world. I think most of the people that use Counterweight are from the United States. So making connections, volunteering with Counterweight, and I have some money to give away, and I have discovered that it's not actually that easy to just give money away.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working to find appropriate venues to do that in the most transparent way possible. So I'm working on all of those things. And I also started writing a newsletter, also on Substack. It's called Diary of a Dissident. Sorry, my cat. My cat and I actually match, kind of, don't we?
Yes, you do. Absolutely do.
Yeah, and I'm
So, okay.
working on some other stuff, just various things.
Mm-hmm.
And
Nice.
my legal complaint with Smith.
Yes, I'm sure that's consuming as well. And Jodi, can we talk about that you gave Plebity money? I forgot to ask you before we started recording.
Oh yeah, that's fine. That's
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'll just mention to plug the Plebity Free Speech Fund. Jodi made a generous donation to us, and we are also looking to give away money. We're looking for recipients who've been canceled for their speech. As usual, it'll be linked below. So if you or someone you know is in need of a grant, please get in touch. And Colin, how about you? What's everything looking like for you right now? What are your various projects?
So right now, I've been spending some time trying to write my book that I've just been slowly plugging away on for a while, and now I need to actually, given that I'm doing Substack and I'm trying to do a podcast, and I'm trying to write some papers for actual scientific journals now, who's contacted me to sort of write about the distortions of, I guess, the narrative surrounding biological sex, which that's actually an exciting thing I'm going to be doing. But yeah, it's just been lots of busyness in general on those fronts. Writing on my Substack, and yeah, basically I've been trying to get some time to write the book. That's going to be my main consuming project for the next probably 6 months, but it's hard to find time just to, have a couple hours each day just to work on that. But I think it's important to get something like that out there. So yeah, that's my main project I'm working on.
Cool. Is the book going to be about biological sex?
It is. It's going to just cover sort of the modern denial of biological sex and sex differences. Hoping to include a good part of just sort of like the evolution of sex and what are the evolutionary hurdles that sex has sort of solved, and then segue that into what sex is and how it's being distorted, and just sort of bring up gender ideology where those things intersect. So it's going to be an interesting, I think, trajectory, a little story about the current moment, at least in this realm.
Yeah, that should be great. Added to the list of, Helen Joyce, Kathleen Stock's books.
Yeah, I've got serious FOMO watching their books come out. I was like, oh, I wish mine was coming out right in this little cohort with all theirs.
So, well, it'll have its own moment. So
yeah,
that'll be good.
I think we're gonna have a lot of craziness moving forward. So I don't think I've missed the boat or anything. So
right. It won't end.
Yeah, unfortunately.
What is FOMO? I haven't heard that before.
Oh, fear of missing out.
Oh yeah.
If all your friends are at a party and you just you see them like texting on social media, posting pictures of them partying, but you didn't get the invite or something.
Yeah, some people said that 2020 was the year FOMO died because there was nothing to miss out on.
Yeah, pretty much.
But, yeah. So, okay, this question will kind of apply to both of you, but I'll ask Colin first. How do you think that the scene has changed, or the narrative has changed, since you first kind of dipped your toe into it, since you first, let's say, wrote that first Quillette article about the new evolution deniers? How do you think things have changed, like the general public feeling around these issues?
I think a lot more people are really just sort of understanding what the problem is, and that there is a problem to begin with. I sort of recently went back and looked at when I first put my new evolution deniers piece, and that came out in 2018, I think November 2018. And I posted it on Twitter and it got a bunch of retweets. So I went and I looked at the comments recently from that. And a lot of the comments were just like, yet again, somebody who can't distinguish between sex and gender. No one is saying that sex isn't real. No one's saying this. No one's saying that. And then, and it was just completely false. Like they've clearly just haven't been keeping up on where the debate's been going, at least from that side of the spectrum. And now I think a lot of people are just like, yeah, they're definitely denying that biological sex is a real thing. And more people are actually saying it too on social media. It's less controversial just to acknowledge that this is something that people are saying and to combat it. Now, whenever I post about these things, I get a lot of more retweets, a lot of people talking about, they can articulate the issue, pretty well. They have a much better idea of what they're up against, and that it's very real, rather than just sort of, oh, this is just something that's taking place on campus here and there. It just bubbles up, one place or the other, but it's not some systemic problem. I think people realize that it's sort of a systemic issue, and that we need to start talking about it, and we are. I mean, we mentioned Helen Joyce's book and Kathleen Stock's. I mean, they're all take the angle of, biological reality is important. And I think their books have been successful so far. So I hope this trend continues, and I hope my book will eventually sort of jump on that and catch the wave as well. So that's the main change I've seen. Just overall awareness is increased.
Nice. Yeah, I think so too. And just to clarify, I don't think their books have come out yet, right?
Oh, that's true. They're coming out
being
soon.
Pre-ordered, but they are doing well with the pre-ordering.
Yeah. That's what I've been hearing.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And then Jodi, what do you think since you left Smith, let's say, let's put the marker there. Have things changed in the atmosphere?
I think so. I mean, as a whistleblower, I have noticed, well, sometimes it's hard for me to assess because I feel like I'm not sure if I'm just inside an information bubble. I can't be too sure. I tried to get outside that bubble, but it kind of just like happens. But there have been a lot more whistleblowers, I've noticed. I feel like every day, just like tons and tons of leaked documents but more importantly, people standing up and putting their name on these things, these issues. And the issues I'm referring to specifically are the critical race theory, enforced trainings, which would break us down into break all of humanity down into two groups, oppressed and oppressor, and which also shares something in common with the gender issue, which is this denial of reality in a way. And I think that maybe we can talk about this later, Sasha, but I've noticed, and I've had this experience myself, where people don't make the connection between those two things. This racial essentialism kind of, and the denial of reality in general. It's not just a denial of biological reality, but kind of this denial of any kind of objective reality. Then that the race issue, the current racial debate, I guess, about CRT and the gender critical issue stem from the same place. And I think sometimes people come to one or the other, and they still don't realize, like, they might become gender critical and but still subscribe to this ideology, which would say that, privilege is inherent to skin color, or oppression is inherent to your skin color. So that's something I've spoken to. I haven't actually spoken to a lot of people about both issues. So this is an interesting podcast for me.
Yeah, I mean, so it's exactly what you said for me. I was gender critical for a long time before I realized there was a very similar problem happening in other areas of social justice. And then it was after I was canceled that I started being exposed to different voices like Quillette, Benjamin Boyce, like these different people. And I realized this is happening all over social justice. And it is really similar. And Colin, I wonder if you agree with Jodi that they have the same source, these kind of the gender ideology and the critical race theory.
Yeah, I mean, I see them as just sort of different heads of the same hydra. It's stemming from just that, and I think was outlined really great in Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay's book, Cynical Theories, where it's just like that critical social justice, looking at people's interactions in terms of power dynamics, heavy reliance on social construction, and the disavowal of any sort of objective truth, rather in favor of sort of individual standpoint, sort of epistemological approaches. That's like the main problem that undergirds all the critical race theory stuff, all the gender ideology. Then you can go into like the post-colonial studies and all those things. Like it's all the same sort of foundational framework. And then there's just sort of slight differences as you sort of move to the heads of these things. Where I know in gender ideology, they tend to sort of deny the biological reality, and they look at sort of society as creating these categories like man and woman as being the suppressive structure. So like the oppression is coming down and forcing people into these categories, and so those are to be rejected, which is why they're sort of more on board with men identifying as women and vice versa. But then how critical race theory sort of takes the opposite approach, where they don't see like these racial categories as being like placed on them to the same degree. I mean, they are to some degree, but then they sort of reify these identities because it's also for them used as like a defense mechanism to guard themselves against their oppressors. So that's why you don't have things like transracialism is completely condemned across the board, whereas transgenderism isn't. Even though when you actually look at sort of the biology of what a racial differences stem from, like race is a much more fluid biological concept than biological sex. Yet for some reason they seem to be okay with people sort of identifying as opposite sexes. But if you try to sort of do the transracial thing, that's just heavily policed. So there's sort of inconsistencies, and all has to do with sort of how different scholars articulated these things with a history of their sort of separate disciplines, which also shows you sort of the arbitrary nature of where we are at any given moment with these ideologies.
It does feel very arbitrary. And we just had Richard Dawkins' big, drama, but he tweeted basically the question, why can you have transgender but not transracial? And he said, discuss. And then, of course, predictably, he got a lot of flack for it. And he ended up following up with like, well, hey, I didn't mean that I'm a right-wing conservative and I would never want to offend the trans community. And then he had a humanist award revoked, right? So what do we make of this? Like Richard Dawkins just asking that question, and then the atheists freak out.
It's insane. I mean, it's they essentially got Richard Dawkins, a humanist organization, excommunicated Richard Dawkins for a form of blasphemy. Essentially, it's like you couldn't write a more ridiculous headline, but that's essentially what took place. I've been a big fan of Richard Dawkins for a while, but this tendency to, you know, I think there was a tendency in academia before, which is sort of why I got into academia, where you could ask really sort of, even in philosophy, sort of ridiculous questions, but they're sort of fit to a purpose where you can say like, these are interesting things, how they intersect, discuss. I mean, I've read papers before, like, why can't we eat humans or something like that? And it starts from just like an absurd thing, but then it says like, no, but when we really get down to it, like, what are the reasons besides like a gut reaction? And these are things that philosophers do. And sometimes they're silly, but sometimes they poke at like really sort of deep things. And they poke at like our gut reactions to things and why we think the way we do. And Dawkins is an academic, and so he thinks that he can just ask these questions and then say discuss and not really endorse any particular view. And that is like a magic spell that academics used to be able to do to sort of take themselves out of the equation and just ask provocative questions. But now we sort of have the inability to do that, where like even asking the question is considered taboo. So it's a really bad change, and that's why largely that I kind of left academia, because I didn't feel like I couldn't do that whole magic spell of just, asking provocative questions and saying discuss without being, accused of all sorts of crimes.
And
Right.
that's really how we make progress, though, isn't it? Discuss.
Yeah, you'd hope so.
And going, I would say the same thing for the arts. When I forget what it was, the Whitney Biennial or something, when a white artist, a white female, painted a portrait, I believe, and I don't have this totally right, so this is like an imagistic paraphrasing, of a black man, and it was actually removed because people complained that a white woman had painted a portrait of a black man. And so this debate, it's the arts have been totally infiltrated by the same thinking. I mean, the arts, that's the realm of the imagination, right? And the ability to get inside, to empathize and connect with something that's universal. And so by telling artists you're not allowed to do that, or that you're limiting their imagination and you're limiting the arts, and it's hurting the arts, just as I imagine it's hurting, or I can see that it's hurting academics.
Mm-hmm.
Makes it impossible for us to ever come up with something amazing and beautiful and new.
Right. That's what I always think about in the literary world, because as you guys know, I was booted out of the publishing industry and for wrongthink. And I always think about that, the loss of the books that are not being published right now because the industry is so censorious and closed-minded, and there's not room for, like you're talking about, Jodi, exploring the difficult questions. Or I mean, honestly, some of these aren't difficult questions. That's what's also confusing. Like, we know there are men and there are women, it's not even difficult, but we've come to this place where you're not even allowed to ask the question. And
Right.
and by the way, I forgot to mention that, Colin, your specialty was spiders, right? Insects. So it wasn't even something related to one of these hot button issues, but still you were harassed intensely.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because, as I mentioned, that I've been contacted by some editors at some good journals to write sort of my arguments about pushing back against biological sex. That they can't find anybody who's in academia who's willing to write this article. They have to find some like exiled spider biologist who can't be canceled anymore, who's willing to just like, say it like it is, say what a lot of people are probably thinking behind their desks in academia. And I just think that's just a wild place to be in right now. And I'm fortunate to be in that position to be able to do that, though, because I get all the benefits and none of the career suicide that I would have had if I'm still in there. So, but it's a really interesting sign of the times where, yeah, I mean, they have to reach out to someone like me to sort of lay it out, something that we've known since, the 1600s, basically, of, well, we've known about biological sex for our entire evolutionary history, but sort of the mechanisms of it and what it is in sort of a more precise scientific definition. We've just sort of forgotten what we've known for quite some time.
That's why we're here.
We couldn't be
Right.
talking right here if sex wasn't real.
You would think that would be more self-evident to people, but they really get confused. I mean, do you guys think people genuinely believe this stuff, or they convince themselves? This is something that I always wonder. Do people genuinely believe that you can change your sex and they're sort of fooled by this? Or are they going along with it for social pressure reasons that we all understand? What do you guys think?
I think this is what I think. I think I mean, I've had people who have studied science explain to me how sex is not real. So I think they believe it, or they seem to think they have evidence for it. But my theory is that most people try really hard to believe. It's kind of like the race thing. They try really hard to believe it because they feel like if they don't believe it, it means they're bad. It means they're transphobic. Or if they don't believe that they have white privilege, or that all Black people are incredibly oppressed and will never make it, and that if they don't believe that, then somehow that means they're racist. And so I think that there's this internal policing going on. And so I think most people don't genuinely believe it. That's just my guess. But they're trying very hard to. And they would never admit it, because then it would make them, expose them as, bad people. So I think, in a way they believe it, but that's what I think. I think it's a real elephant in the room.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think a lot of them didn't believe it to begin with, and a good way to get rid of sort of the cognitive dissonance they have in their fields is to sort of double down and become a true believer. It's just much easier to go about your day if you just sort of buy into these ideologies. I won't name any names, but I had a colleague, someone I knew very well in academia. They got hired on as an assistant professor at a major research university. Immediately when they got hired, it wasn't even a week gone by until pronouns showed up in the bio. They originally enjoyed my first Quillette article, New Evolution Deniers. They thought I was talking about a problem that wasn't really a big problem. It's just a few wackos on the internet. Remember, they said, no one's really saying biological sex isn't real. I point out, like, well, this tweet got 100,000 retweets, and it's saying that, it's what I think the tweet said, something that like trans women are biological women. And remember, his response to that was, well, I'm sure, because at the time there was like an NBA thing where this player named Kyrie Irving was sort of questioning whether the Earth was a sphere, and so he was sort of in the news of like, Kyrie Irving denies, he's a flat earther. And my friend's response was like, well, I'm sure Kyrie Irving would get a bunch of retweets too if he said, the Earth is flat. So here's my friend comparing the claim trans women are biological women to the claim the Earth is flat, and he was criticizing me for really basically arguing with flat earthers, and I should just basically ignore him because it's not a real problem. Fast forward to today, he's completely into the whole sex is a spectrum, all that, just down the line. That sort of that gender ideology, sex denialism across the board, thinks trans women should be able to play against female athletes, just full endorsement of that view now. And I still, I'm tempted to just be like, well, what happened to you? Look at, I have all these receipts of you, seemingly thinking these ideas are ridiculous. And as soon as he gets his job and is now going up for tenure and stuff, he's just this ratcheting down of his skepticism towards this one issue. And now he's for all appearances, a true believer now, which has been interesting to watch that evolution.
Wow.
It's so black and white. Like, it just shows us such reductionist nature of our thinking, or in general in our culture. Like, that, why is it so hard to acknowledge that there are biological differences, there are two sexes, and to acknowledge that people are transgender, like that people can live, a man can live as a woman, and we can, you know, all agree to treat that man as a woman for whatever that means. That's a whole nother thing, but, or whatever that person believes a woman is, but also think that it's not actually physically possible for a man to be a woman. Like that to me just shows how hard I mean, that doesn't even seem like a nuance, really. That just,
Yeah.
like, we can't even hold those two things in our head. Like, why does it have to go all the way where it's like physical reality is actually not real, you know? I
Yeah.
think there are a lot of trans people that do acknowledge the difference.
All that's being asked is to hold two ideas in your head at the same time. I mean, it's not a three body problem that gets like so much more complex as you keep adding layers. There's really just like two things you need to maintain, and that's just like the biology is one thing and identity is a whole separate thing, and they're not the same, and they don't necessarily need to conflict.
Yeah, and some people break traditional gender roles. Like, people have been doing that forever with David Bowie and, Prince. I mean, like, that's that's a thing. It doesn't physically make them that's actually a beautiful thing, I think. It doesn't physically make them the opposite sex.
Right? When we say that adopting the role of the other sex makes you the other sex, we are kind of, and this has obviously been said many times, but we're entrenching those stereotypes and really continuing to limit people to those boxes. And it kind of reminds me of the critical race theory in a sense that if you're white, you're supposed to be a certain way, or you're certain things define being white that are more cultural, seem more, cultural or relative, subjective, but then we're being told that they are like intrinsically tied to being white or to being black. So yeah, I guess, how do you guys see that role of, like, I don't know, essentialism? Would you call that essentialism?
Yeah, it's assumptions.
Mm,
It's pure assumptions, and it's reductionist, and it's making people into groups, monoliths based on their skin color. And you're exactly right, in my opinion, reifying gender, very, very traditional gender stereotypes. I mean, this notion that if you put on a dress and put on nail polish, then that's what makes somebody a woman. That's completely wrong, and in my mind is not very progressive at all.
I think
I,
that's where. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's very limiting in general, and also makes us smaller in a way, and
mhm.
more afraid, and less adventurous, and less rebellious, and less anti-establishment. It's just the whole thing is just very conformist.
Yeah, I think that was sort of my initial sort of thing that made me step back and really shake my head, like what is going on here, because I just saw these ideologies under the guise of progressivism and justice. They were just sort of recapitulating what I saw as sort of old school racist ideas, racial essentialism. We know anything about you just based on the color of your skin. You need to think this way if you have this skin color, and they're policing sort of the way people think based on their skin color. And then the same thing with the whole gender ideology, like we're defining what it means to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman, based on these regressive stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. I mean, they'll deny that's what they're doing, but I've chased them down that rabbit hole and really tried to pin them and say, like, well, what do you mean? Like, how does one live as a woman? What are you talking about? What do you mean when you identify? Are you identifying with these certain traits, and what are those traits? And it always boils down to just sort of, well, you get the what's his name? Uh, the British comedian guy who's trans, but he always talks about how he goes in girl mode and
Oh
he's
yeah,
all
Eddie Izzard.
Eddie Izzard, yeah.
Yeah.
And when he talks about how she is trans, he goes back and forth, but he talks about I'm in girl mode and I'm just wear my dresses and I'm super feminine and all this stuff, and then he goes in boy mode. Like, he literally talks about girl mode and boy mode in the most stereotypical way possible. And this is the way you see a lot of people talking about these things, and it's just so clear that they're talking about stereotypes, just like average behaviors of males and females, and then they're just sort of calling that manhood or womanhood or boyhood, and then, God forbid you're a tomboy or a effeminate male, and now you're being told that you're the opposite sex. It just couldn't be more regressive, and that's what sort of made me need to speak up and say something about this, because this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't progressive at all.
Yeah, there's not much else besides other than stereotypes, really. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an academic, and so I always get a little uncomfortable wading into these areas. But if we remove the biological difference, all of the things that make us different based on our biology, men and women, then all the other differences truly are stereotypes and societal, cultural things that are imposed on us. And so it's almost like, have you heard that? I'm sure, Sasha, you've heard it, where the hair color is socially constructed, but the haircut is.
I haven't heard this one.
So when the haircut is biological, but the hair color is socially constructed, or something like. I'm not getting it right. It's like the making it the opposite. Like the sex isn't real, but like these actual things that are just stereotypes are like, those are somehow now the real things that make something man or woman, as opposed to their actual biology.
Okay, like if I dye my hair blonde, I'm now a blonde. Something, I don't know. Yeah. Even though I actually still have brown hair underneath, or that grows. So yeah, I mean, there's also this element of the differences. We have to pretend those differences don't exist or ignore them or whatever. But if we acknowledge them, it's like we're acknowledging patriarchy. And we talked about this, Colin, when I interviewed you, that they're assigning these value judgments to our differences, like for men and women. And so it's come to the point now where if you say that males have an advantage in sport, you can get accused of supporting patriarchy.
Yeah, it's male supremacy or something. And they seem to rail against the people. Like, they have this tendency of people pointing to a difference, or it's this hyper focus on word usage. Like if I were to describe an intersex person as like, oh, well, this is a developmental error took place. So like, you're calling them an error. It's just like, well, I'm not calling it, like, they're not an error. Like this, but there's a developmental process, and it resulted in like an incomplete development of something. Oh, they're incomplete. Is, you get all these hyper focus on words trying to just make you out to be a bigot of anything. And it's just like
social contagion.
Yeah.
Too,
and it's
right?
like they're the ones that are putting like the moral component into the language. Like, I'm not doing that. And as far as I know, most scientists who talk about sex differences aren't doing that. So like my advice to the woke ideology people is just like, just stop doing it. Like, you don't need to do it. You're the ones that are doing it. We're not doing it. We're not saying, males are stronger than females on average, therefore we're superior. Maybe in a weightlifting context where more weight is wins, yeah, that's maybe you can call it superior in that context, but it's not superior in some like, ultimate cosmic sense that they try to act like we're talking about things. It's just so like aggravating to talk to people who try to do that and pick your language apart.
Mm-hmm. And Colin, didn't they come after you for saying that, gender dysphoria is looking like a social contagion?
Yeah, that was definitely a big Twitter pile-on they had, even though social contagion is something that's studied in all types of contexts. And even apparently, I talked to Nicholas Christakis, and there had apparently been a gender social contagion that happened sometime in the 90s. Like, these things are documented. And we get the people responding saying, well, it can't be a social contagion because, these being trans is overall negative on people. These are oppressed groups. Why would you identify into an oppressed category? Well, social contagion is documented in things like suicide. Like, they'll have, a series of suicides, and it'll spark like a social contagion type thing. Also things like anorexia, like these are negative effects on the human body. So just because it's a social contagion doesn't mean that, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're trying to take on an identity for a positive reason. I mean, it could be, but it's really, there's no moral component to saying social contagion. It just means it's trendy to some degree. That's basically all that's being said, and that shouldn't be vilified. It's a robust field.
And it also made me think of that it's another form of denying something about us as humans, that we are susceptible to trends. They're saying like somehow that we are that everything comes from within when we make a decision about our identity, or okay, God forbid I call it a decision. Say that again.
This time we're not susceptible to social contagion. Like, oh, we can look at that was a social contagion back then, but this time we're not susceptible. There's arrogance in that. And that we're not mob think either. Like, of course we are. That's like almost primal.
Yeah, there's a super contradiction they have where they like, in certain contexts, there's no limit to what they put on the effects of the social environment. You know, like everything, like male and female are different behaviors. It's all socialization across the board, you know, blank slate, you know, sort of ideology, except for this one thing. And this is all just internal, and you cannot say that any social factors have any influence on it whatsoever. And it's just like, well, I thought you guys were the social factors dictate everything people. But apparently not, you know, when it goes against a certain narrative. So it's really bizarre.
Yeah, and it kind of is another part that reveals the religious-like nature of all this stuff. And, you know, Colin, I know we also talked about this because you used to be somewhat of like a vocal atheist, and then that's carried you through to this as well. I mean, can we talk about that, the religious aspect, the orthodoxy of these two, the critical race and the gender? I mean, yeah, I'd be curious to hear from both of you, if you know how you see that playing out right now.
Well, that I've seen that argument floating around recently, in legal people, like lawyers or legal people, making that argument and describing how all of the or many of the factors of how one would define or break down and define a religion are present in, for lack of a better word, woke. There, this new orthodoxy, and you know, of course, people compare it to cults all the time, very cult-like behavior. But this whole act, you know, this belief that, except for in this particular religion, there is no real redemption. If you, for example, if you confess to white privilege or bury your soul and say, yes, I have white privilege, like it's kind of like it gets you a pass for a while, but like you're never truly, it's a religion which you can never truly redeem yourself. And but it has a lot of similar, it has ritual, that's a ritual, you know, that kind of training environment. It's a belief system, obviously. It does not rely on logic, evidence, or reason. In fact, it's a direct attack on those things. The ideology actually indirectly attacking objectivity. It's attacking evidence, reason, and logic, the Enlightenment values. So clearly, that's what else is there but a religion? Just the terminology, like, do you believe in white privilege? Do you believe in this? So it's like, well, it either exists or it doesn't, you know, like it's not whether or not I believe in it. So it's, I think it's uncannily very much like a religion. And it would be great if we could recognize it as such.
Yeah, I think the main religious component of it, you know, there is to some degree like a spiritual nature behind some of the things. Like people have compared gender ideology to sort of like you know, we all have this sort of gendered soul, and there's some like sort of magic thinking going on to some degree. But I think the biggest glaring comparison to religion is just the existence of dogmas, just these ideas that can't be questioned. And we see that with Richard Dawkins. You know, he just floated an idea and wanted people to discuss, and then the American Humanist Association excommunicated him for that. Having been part of the atheist organizations and movement for, you know, the late 2000s and early 2010s, it was sort of a first test case for how the critical social justice takes over a movement and then just destroys it from the inside. I mean, it split the atheist community right down the middle, and unfortunately, they took all the higher spots and seats because they're sort of more activist focused, whereas most of the original atheists were just very church and state separation people, and that was what they focused on. And then it slowly shifts to just be, Democrats who are for social justice who also happen to be atheists. And it's been really interesting seeing the split in the movement. Some people I never thought would have bought into these ideologies. This guy named Matt Dillahunty, he was one of my favorite intellectuals, taught me how to think critically, and he's just totally gone now, totally gone. Blocked me on Twitter because I just corrected something he said about J.K. Rowling and suggested, I don't think she's transphobic. I don't think you read the essay. Boom, I'm gone. So that was sort of shocking. But a lot of what I would say is the better people in the new atheist movement, like the Dawkins, the Sam Harris's, Steven Pinker, all those people, they seem to have, even Michael Shermer, they sort of recognize the religious nature of the sort of new woke ideology, and fortunately they can apply sort of all the tools they had for combating religion to combating these ideologies, because in a lot of sense they use the same types of arguments. Like when I talk to the people denying biological sex, you get the same things you get from evolution deniers, which is like arguments from complexity. We talked about the intelligent design people that say like, when I is too complex to have ever evolved, and now you get people saying that, oh, biological sex is too complex to ever really know what sex somebody is. And these are just the same types of arguments, just repackaged in a sort of a new context. But you once you've seen them before, you can sort of see how they're just wearing like a new coat pretty much. And yeah, it's very, very much a lot of parallels to religion.
Heresy.
What was that?
Heresy is a big part of it.
Yeah. And just anyone who talks about it, they just get
What happened to you?
thrown
Block.
out.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
just a matter of faith. And if you're not in the faith, then you're out. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
even religions aren't, I mean, there are religions, I mean, Christianity, for example. I mean, I know a lot of Christians, and I'm not Christian, but they don't like block me. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
so it's a kind of a, if it's a religion, it's a very fierce one and very
Mhm.
punishing one.
Yeah.
It's I would liken it closer to a cult, where you get banished. I mean, I guess like I'm thinking about like there are a lot of different Hasidic sects of Judaism, but I'm thinking in particular of a couple of individuals I know who left, and they were, they're essentially banished. Like they're cut off from everyone, all their family members. It's like that with Scientology too. And I'm not calling it a cult. It's a religion, but to me, it strikes me as that's a fierce one. That if you are not going to go along with everything, then you're out. You are out.
Mhm.
That kind of religion.
Yeah, exactly. I know a woman as well who left the Hasidic community in New York, and she describes it as a cult that she had to escape. And it is a strange thing. I mean, that you guys have pointed out. I have friends who are religious. I have a friend who's Seventh Day Adventist. I have, Catholic friends, whatever. They don't block me or say they're not going to be my friend because they know that I'm an atheist. Whereas with gender, you do get that. I have had people say, there is no room in my life for transphobia. And so now suddenly I'm like excommunicated. So,
Yeah, that's really troubling. Like how the damage to relationships that all of this is causing and to families. Um, yeah, I've lost friends. Not even so much because even though I was supportive of whatever they wanted to believe, but because I didn't actually believe it also. Even though I wasn't saying you can't do that or I hate you. It was like, but it was because they were like, I know you don't actually believe this. It's like, wow, that's a very high bar that I actually have to believe a certain way. Um, so I think that I'm very concerned about what that's doing to the fabric of our society. I think it's very extremely unhealthy and toxic behavior, and it's infiltrating everything. I'm hearing stories all the time. I have so many people reaching out to me all the time talking about their families, and their families are splitting up and people are being shunned. And I mean, this is inside our houses now. This is inside our families. And I hear from people who have lived under communist regimes, Soviet era, USSR, and how they couldn't even trust people in their own family, because people would rat each other out and things like that. And it's really scary to me, because once it gets inside our houses, it's very concerning. I can say it's extremely unhealthy, and I really wish that more people, we could have a conversation about this at the very least. But as described, it's a very fierce religion.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate that my family is pretty much on the same page that I am on this, so there's no rift there. But the same can't be said for my greater friend circle. And since writing about these issues, yeah, I've had one friend in particular. I mean, this happened to several, but I had one friend who was someone who I would describe as I could talk to them about anything, even if we had really big disagreements. We would always have that conversation. We always entered it with good faith. We knew each other was really, we're good people and we could communicate. And we almost always ended up closer to being on the same page than we had originally thought. And I posted maybe my first article, New Evolution Deniers, and then I think I posted maybe a few follow-ups. And he admitted he didn't even read some of the follow-up ones, and he basically just on Facebook just ended our entire friendship right there, and just, you know, don't talk to me again until you've like done the work type, you know, just it's almost like this Mad Lib type of thing where everyone has seen that sort of statement where they'll come at you and like, you need to do X, Y, Z, you're erasing the existence of blah, 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 just enter in the sort of terminology. And it's just like, I don't even know what to do with that. It's just, okay, if you ever want to talk to me, I'll be here. But yeah, I mean, so, and that's happened with several different friends. And yeah, it's that always hurts way more when it's someone close to you, someone around you that does that. So I don't even post on Facebook anymore, just because it's sort of a captive audience of my friends since childhood. And you know, I can get dunked on by people on Twitter all day, and I don't care if strangers are calling me names. But yeah, it really does hurt when it's those around you who know you intimately and who should know better and who should give you the benefit of the doubt. And when they're not doing it, it's just like, man, we've lost the plot somewhere. We've gone far from where we should be. And it's incredibly concerning.
Yeah, I found that those are actually my most vocal critics, are the people that actually know me. Or not even, I wouldn't even call it critic. That's a polite, like, the condemnation
Yeah.
comes most strongly from people who personally know me. And I always wonder about that. Like, what's that about? Like, why do they feel so strongly? And in some cases, people I haven't seen for years, you know, coming out of the woodwork to just, I would say, harass me. And so there's something about them knowing me that makes them more upset than if I were just some random stranger doing this. Because there's a lot of people speaking out that I'm sure they don't harangue in the same way. So I often wonder about that dynamic, like what that means.
It's probably just more dissonant to them because they do know who you are as a good person. And so if you're someone who can spout these things, I'm not saying you're spouting anything, but like it attacks, it's more of an attack on them because they know you're a good person who's saying things that they, you know, they've been told are evil. And so it's, in a way, it's more dangerous to their worldview if it's closer to them. I mean, you get this with, I think women get attacked way more hard for the gender ideology stuff. Like I published the Wall Street Journal paper with Emma Hilton, and I was a first author on that, and I got, you know, some harassment on Twitter, but I didn't get any DMs. Maybe I got like one or two DMs of people just, you know, calling me names or stuff like that. But she was inundated with these DMs by people that were making threats and just horrible things in there. So they try to police sort of the people that are maybe closer to them, which they view as, you know, oh, these are people who claim to be feminists, and, you know, they should be on our side for these things because trans women are women. And so they'll come after them way harder than they'll come after some white guy like me who's, I guess I'm just a lost cause to them. Like they they don't even care what I think about things. So there is a tendency to sort of police those closest to you even harder than people that are far away, which I guess to some degree makes sense, but it's all the more troubling too. But
Is it just me because I'm from Smith, coming from Smith, a women's college, or I get the sense there's also more women harassing other women.
I don't disagree. I've noticed that too. You know, it's been a lot of women harassing me and coming after me as well.
I just saw
So,
something like women score higher. I think this is a Jordan Peterson thing on agreeableness, and that makes them more. I can't remember the second part of it, but something about that drives a tendency one to want to fix things, but and be good and everything to be in agreement. But then there's this dark side. I wish I
mhm.
could remember. I see, this is why I'm not an academic. I can't.
I think there's a difference between like they say that men and women are similarly aggressive, but depending on how you define aggressiveness,
Hmm.
for males, again, on average, it's going to be they're more likely to be sort of physically aggressive and violent, but women, on average, are more likely to sort of do the sort of passive aggressive, reputational attacks than men are more likely to do. And so it's been pointed out that social media is sort of just like the perfect environment for that stereotypically female route of aggression, because it's indirect. It's more reputational. They can go that route and ruin
More
people.
verbal. It's more.
Yeah, it's really verbal as well. Yeah.
And this goes back to the biology stuff, like that women develop language, right? Don't they develop language skills earlier than girls on average earlier than boys? They learn to read and write
Yeah.
and speak.
And
And
they score higher generally on verbal uh
yeah,
verbal
there might be some biological component to that, and then physical stuff.
Mhm.
Hoping you
Yeah,
could comment on that, Colin.
yeah, Colin, you can tell us, right?
I need to brush up more on my evolutionary psychology. I was the social insect guy, and I did study personality, but it was in insects and animals generally, and it's really fascinating because I've been trying to go into the human personality literature, and the way they measure personality in humans and other animals is they're almost like there's not even a bridge. Like they do them so differently.
Really? How
Um,
so?
Well, for like animals, since you can't have an animal fill out like a survey and a question, and even there's problems with doing that with people because people tend to rate
Right.
themselves based on like how they like to think they are. So it's actually better to have another human, like a close friend, maybe probably like your mom or your dad, fill out your personality test for you because they actually are more objective. Maybe not your parents because they might just be like, oh, they're just fantastic. But someone who knows you, who's they spent some time with you, can sort of more accurately uh, describe your personalities than you can yourself. But for animals, you have to just sort of use these proxies. You have to look at these objective things, like you might look at, how aggressive are they, and you need to quantify it as like how often do they attack this new object in their environment or something, and how many times per minute, and you have to constantly make these new standards for trying to measure these certain things because they can't actually fill out a form or anything like that. So you need to measure their boldness and I mean, in spiders, for instance, we would give them like an aversive stimulus and they would cause them to like huddle in a ball, and then we would just measure like how much time it takes for them to like unhuddle and sort of begin their normal movement, and that was our measure of like how bold they are and how risk averse or non-averse they were. So there's almost like no good bridge to human behavior. The humans have like the big five personality traits and stuff, and I need to get better at that because I'm actually more interested in the human aspect of things right now than insects. No,
Sounds
insects are still
fascinating.
cool.
Evolutionary psychology.
It is, and of course, it's like one of the most, well, I'd say contentious, at least in the cultural, publicly. Even though I mean, it's certainly true that our psychology has evolved and to behave certain ways. So just keep getting drawn to like the controversial things. So
Because those are the interesting things, aren't
yeah,
they?
they're controversial because they poke at like really important things in society, and so they're very polarizing in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
That's why.
So, yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead, Jodi.
No. You go.
Okay. I was just going to say, so Colin, what do you think of Peterson's lobster analogy? Because he kind of uses that to talk about human behavior, right? So he basically says, if people haven't read it, that lobsters, male lobsters, they're always fighting each other. And if you are a loser, if you lose a fight, you become weaker and smaller. And then you are more likely to then go on and lose the next fight. So it's like this compounding thing where the more dominant you are, the more dominant you can be. And he applies this to humans as well.
Yeah, he also uses that as because there's like, I guess the lobsters use the same sort of neural pathways that evolved like super long time ago that we still see in mammals and even humans today. I think that's a good analogy to bring up. I think you can probably take it too far, but I haven't seen him taking it too far. I see a lot of people that are sort of taking it too far on his behalf, possibly. And but I mean, a lot of it's hard to separate like what's the memes from the serious people, because there's like this lobster army now that just kind of goes out there, and I think they're just having fun with it, which is I think it's fine. But I mean, his main message is like, yeah, these are these ancient evolved traits that we have. We can't just assume that because we're very social that these ancient evolved mechanisms no longer apply. He doesn't have to go to lobsters, but I mean, it'd be much more convincing to me that you can just talk about our closest ancestors like chimpanzees and bonobos and gorillas and stuff. And I mean, they have all these types of behaviors too we can see in nature. But I think his point is that, it goes back deep time as well, and forming hierarchies and things like that. So it's definitely a powerful argument, I think.
And then, of course, he gets canceled for this because it's so wildly offensive.
Well, I mean, everyone says like, oh, he's comparing humans to lobsters, and I mean that's an absurd thing to on the face of it. But if you actually understand what he's trying to communicate, it's not really absurd. Like, he's not saying people are lobsters, but people don't like to give people the benefit of the doubt anymore. So
No, they
kind of
don't.
if you look at the intent, it's not too bad.
Makes a good meme too. Good soundbite.
Yeah, he's really leaned into it, which I enjoy.
Did you guys see the thing where, now I'm not going to know what it's called, but they made this comic cartoon out of Jordan Peterson? They made him the villain.
I didn't see that. He would be a good.
Yeah. What was I can't remember the name of it. I don't do comics too much. Yeah, Red Skull and the Captain America, and I guess it was written by Ta-Nehisi Coates was the person who like wrote
it him? Okay,
he's wrote this
critical
and
race
like the villain, the villain Red Skull. I don't know the comic, but just from what I've read recently, is like their Nazi character that Captain America fights against, and like there's these scenes where Red Skull's holding up. He's just like he's the Nazi spreading ideology, and he's got this thing. It's like 10 rules for life, and he's like this is basically parroting, like clearly talking about Jordan Peterson's his book and his ideas, and so it's basically trying to compare Jordan Peterson to a Nazi. So he's leaned into that too, and he's made T-shirts and he's donating the money to charities and stuff. So it's good. You have to lean into this stuff. I think it's the best way to do it. Just laugh it off, because
if you can laugh at yourself, then you're still. I consider that like a real. I really enjoy being around people that can make fun of themselves. And I've discovered that the more I interact with British people, it's kind of a British thing too. That's self-effacing humor. Nice. What you were talking about before with the lobster, like essentially we're talking about power. And the like going back to the chimps and status, and the lobster, and it's all about power, really. And when I think about this ideology, this ideology, within the ideology that we're talking about power, like it's ostensibly talking about, well, we know where we're dissecting and understanding where all these power, and basically it's just a bunch of assumptions about where the power is, when really this ideology is about power, I think. It's
Yeah.
exerting power over people and trying to get you at threat of possibly losing your job to say a certain prescribed phrase or even believe something. And that's a power, that's literally a power play. So, I mean, when I was told that I was engaging in a power play, when I was said I was uncomfortable talking about my race, that was literally a power play that they were committing against me. They were asserting power over me and trying to force me to do something. That's about power. So all of this really, I think, boils down to it's a power struggle.
It's almost like funny how a lot of those activists say that things like capitalism or the status quo is so power obsessed, and then they know how this is a terrible thing. And then they, rather than saying like we need to stop this focus on power, they just say, well, we're just gonna, player two has entered the game, and now we're just gonna play this power dynamic, and they're just going for the throat of everyone, trying to grab as much power as possible. So they really don't have like a foot to stand on criticizing these other systems that are based on power, and they're finding power where no power structure actually exists and assuming that it does, and now they're injecting their power hierarchies into areas that shouldn't have it, and it's just a huge mess. And it's just so easy to see this. They're just trying to gobble up as much power as they can every second, every step of the way.
That makes it so hard to deal with it or face it, because I mean, there are certain people who are very anti-woke who want to just completely squash it and wipe it off the face of the earth. It's kind of like wiping off like but you can't wipe out an idea, right? You can't you can't extinguish a thought or a belief system. So and then there are other people who are like, well, it's fine, it's going to exist, but it can't, like, as long as it's like, you go do your thing, I'm going to do my thing. But it's hard to know how to I guess fight it or resist it when it only knows the language of power. And sometimes it feels like, well, we just have to like be super powerful. And when I say we, I falling into the trap of we and they, and I don't like to do that. But for those of us who are struggling to navigate this landscape, it's hard to know what to do, because as a good liberal, I like to believe that other people are entitled to think and believe whatever they want and say whatever they want. It's when it's infringing onto not only just limiting what I can say, but compelling me to say certain things. That's even more over the line, compelled speech. That's where I'm like, no, that's a boundary. Like, don't go there. But when it's like, when it's happening and you are literally, it's having a material impact on your life, like you can lose your job and not only lose your job, but become completely unhireable, possibly for the rest of your life. That's pretty serious. And so it's hard to just say, okay, well, I guess I got fired and I'm just going to let them go on. It's hard to know how to the only word I can use is fight, how to navigate it and still hold on to your liberal values, I guess. I guess that's what I'm really trying to say. And stay fast to liberalism. And because I know that the other way doesn't work. Last tribe standing, that doesn't work, because then you just become the same thing that you're trying to. That's why liberalism has worked so well for so long. But that's what's at when liberalism itself is under threat. It's hard to know how do we protect liberalism. Do we do it by continuing to be liberal? I don't know. I mean, I'm a very strong believer in liberalism, but it's something I struggle with sometimes in thinking about this.
Right, because it's like,
Yeah.
how do we combat this with and while still promoting free speech and while not just crushing them in the way that they're crushing us, right? I mean, because that's what they're doing. They're saying these ideas are so harmful that they can't even be allowed to be spoken or even thought. And they don't want to engage with them, whereas we are willing to engage. But then if you have the other side who's not, what do you do with that?
Yeah, how do you make progress then? If their one side just refuses, they refuse to even use sorry, I'm doing it again. People who believe in this ideology, because the ideology attacks evidence, reason, and logic, if you're not both using those tools, then it's impossible to have a conversation, because it's impossible to analyze each other's argument or make any progress or even change your mind. Because they're using faith as discussed, and or they sorry people who believe in this ideology are using faith, and that's you can't reason with that. And liberalism is really based on reason and enlightenment values. So I think that's a real question we need to grapple with.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to know how to play fair when one side is like not playing by the rules. So I think a lot of people, and I include myself in this, wanted to play the fair route, and that's just like, I'll just keep writing essays, and if I can just word my essay better and better, if I get the wording more and more perfect, then I'll convince people. And I think something that people like Christopher Rufo have shown is that doesn't always work. You can't just keep writing the same essay again in ever clearer language. I don't think what Chris Rufo is doing is beyond the pale or anything. I think it's good that he's taken up a different a different mode of attack, and that's just like going in the courts, trying to get things banned in certain ways. And I think there is a good place for that. We have to be playing the battle on multiple fronts. It's got to be the legal battle. It's got to be the battle of ideas. Some people think Rufo's going, too far or something. Say like, you're trying to ban these ideas. Say, well, we're not trying to ban ideas. It's as people who pay taxes, we should have a say-so of what gets taught in our public schools and things like that. So we can try not to have things like state-sanctioned racism and make the argument for that. But no one's arguing that you shouldn't be able to discuss the ideas themselves in universities. It's just, we can push back against bad curriculum. And so I'm more and more open to sort of the more, I don't want to say in your face. I think people like James Lindsay might go a little too far in sort of just like dunking on people left and right. Although I think he's also very effective in some other ways. And I consider James one of my friends, even though I know we disagree on sort of the way we go about things. But I'm more and more open to the Christopher Rufo. We need to hit him hard in the courts and also write the essays. Sometimes they go a little far and they'll criticize people like Kathy Young, who are just writing essays. And I think, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Kathy's a fantastic journalist an amazing writer. I think that's her strength, and she should stick to doing that. I think I like to write things more and write letters of, denouncing. I did a few letters when universities were trying to cancel some professor, and I wrote a letter to the chancellors or something like that. So those are things I can do. Christopher Rufo's really good at going at people in courts and talking to lawyers, and we all have the way we can combat these things, and I don't think we should try to police each other too much on how we're each sort of going about this. There's plenty of room for different tactics, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And go ahead, Jodi. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, I think creativity is encouraged. I often think about the American revolutionaries, like I've used this story a lot, so forgive me, Sasha, if I've used it on Plebity before, about the rules of engagement, where you meet in a field at dawn, and the people who are expendable are in the front, and the leaders are in the, you don't shoot the leaders. There's rules. And then you just start shooting. And the early patriots were like, oh my gosh, we're going to lose. Like it was immediately apparent, like we cannot play by these rules of engagement, because we're going to get creamed. And so what they did was they just got super creative. and they started doing things in unexpected ways, like hiding in the forest and sniping, leading, making the Brits getting lost, I think, and picking off the leaders first, which is like, oh my god, the British were like, oh my god, you're not supposed to do that, and then they're totally confused because what do we do? Our leaders are gone. So like, and then this like developing this amazing messaging network, like where they could get a message really fast, like all the way from way up north down south really fast before the ship even got into harbor. So it was like they, and it took a long time, but they did it. I mean, this was the most powerful army in the world for a long time. I mean, it was just incredible if you think about it. And I never really thought about it until this stuff started happening. And then I went back and I started learning about American history, and I was like, that is pretty amazing. They were they just were really strategic and really creative. So I think, right,
Yeah.
I think more, we just need to be super creative.
We versus them.
Let's grapple
Well,
with this.
yeah, it's a really good point about the rules of engagement, because if we look at some of their rules of engagement, I mean, I was just listening to an Ibram X. Kendi lecture, and you guys already know this, but he's basically saying the heartbeat of racism is denial. That's one principle. Another one is non-racists are racists in denial. And third, one of the most important principles is that the heartbeat of anti-racism is confession. So the rules of engagement for this ideology are like, you have to confess that you're racist. It's kind of a Kafka trap too, because if you deny that you're a racist, that makes you even more of a racist. But you have to admit that you're a racist in order to not be racist. Does it even make sense? And how do we engage with that?
Did he actually use the word confess?
I believe he did, yeah.
It's very poetic though. The heartbeat of this.
Yeah.
He's a preacher,
Right.
a woke preacher, for
Right.
sure. Back to the whole religion thing. It's
Mhm.
it's there. I see it so so clearly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a question for you guys that maybe can help us kind of wrap up. Do you have advice for people who are still in their jobs and in their careers, but they're sort of surrounded by wokeism, and they might be questioning or thinking about whether they should speak out or how they might do it? Do you guys have advice for them from the other side?
Yeah, I have advice. I think the very first thing is you're not alone and you're not crazy. And in order to really know that, because there's a lot of introjection that happening where you, in these kinds of environments where you start to think of yourself as bad because you don't believe in it. As strong an individual as you are, this is human psychology. I think it's really important to find somebody else in that environment that you can talk to consistently validate that you're not crazy, and that, yeah, this other stuff is crazy and you're not crazy. And I really think that it takes, and that's why the beauty of Counterweight is the community that they have, where you can get on the Discord server and find other people in your field just to talk to, because there's an unraveling that happens. And even I sometimes I feel like I'm still unraveling my brain. Like it's a deprogramming, really, like we were talking about cults. So I think it goes a long way just to find one other person, preferably in the same environment, that you can talk to regularly, and then hopefully expand that. And I know several people who have reached out to me who have said that once they found just one other person, that gave them the strength after unraveling a little bit to proceed, because they knew, okay, I'm not crazy. Like like because you really start to question reality in these kinds of environments. So for me, I think build your team, and just one other person can be your team. That's my advice.
Perfect.
Yeah, definitely. I thought I was insane. I had a good couple of years where I thought I was losing my mind. And a lot of people say that that Twitter makes them crazy. Twitter actually made me less crazy, because I actually got to see people like, oh, okay, I'm not the only
Yeah.
one who's thinking the same way. Like, there's people who are identifying the same problems. And I felt like I finally found my sanity again when I started going online and realizing it wasn't just me who was having these reservations. But I agree with everything Jodi said there. Find someone who who you can talk to, which can be difficult sometimes because you always run that risk of, like, hey, what do you think about this thing? And nobody kind of wants to be super honest because they're going to be worried that you're asking them because you might want to pounce on them, and you don't want to give too much away because you don't want them to pounce on you. So
Right.
there's that problem. So even if it's someone online, people can reach out to. I mean, people reach out to me, and I know I'm sure you've got people who've DM'd you as well about,
Oh yeah.
what's going on here. I need some advice of what's going on. I would also say to take records of as much as you possibly can, because that can only help you in the future if you need to counter sue like you're doing, Jodi. I'm sure if you have a lot of records, that can only help you if you have sort of the
Definitely,
paper trail of everything, that if you're actually the direct recipient of some sort of abuse or something. But it's tough for a lot of people to, not everyone is going to just write an article for Quillette or something, and we certainly can't publish everyone's coming out story. It's going to depend on your situation. If you're the only breadwinner in your family and you have children to take care of, there might be less overt ways you can try to combat this type of stuff. Ultimately, I would say try to show up to the meetings, try to be on some of the boards that make decisions in some of these realms. And even if you're at some of these meetings where they're going over whether it's like diversity training or gender ideology and stuff, if you just sort of play Socrates and just act like you're just trying to learn more about their ideology, like, what do you mean about, like, living as a woman? Like, exactly what does it mean to live as a woman or identify as one? And just really just try to pin them down in a friendly way, that you're just you're open to these ideas, you're just not quite sure what they mean by this. A lot of times that will not only reveal to you what they're getting at, but other people in the room will sort of maybe be less likely to just walk down the garden path with these people who are trying to sort of get this ideology across by using incredibly vague terminology that people feel like they might intuitively sort of understand, but when you actually get to the details, it's just like madness under the hood. So any way you can contribute helps. Certainly not everyone can do what Jodi did and make a YouTube video and risk it all. But
yeah, that's what Counterweight is. I just want to put a plug for Counterweight here.
No, for sure, it's so useful.
Yeah, because Counterweight, I like what you said about, not everybody wants to do that. And these are very sensitive things. Like, maybe you don't want to expose to your whole community. You just kind of want to just be able to go to your job and not be forced to say things that you don't believe in. And also work in a racially hostile work environment. In my case, like, just please, want your employer just to follow the law. That's all. You don't want to make a big deal out of it. You just please follow the law. Counterweight really meets the individual where they're at and helps them clarify what kind of action they might want to take, if any. Sometimes they just want to be in the community and talk it out and realize they're not crazy. And then sometimes then it can be bearable. For other people, it means writing a letter, or, like you suggested, being on the committee, in some cases being on the equity and diversity committee, and helping steer to a more healthy discussion about those things than this toxic thing that we have now. And so that's why I really like Counterweight. It really meets the individual where they're at, and it totally can be behind the scenes and very private. And Counterweight's managed to help a lot of people. And but it's, because they don't publicize these cases, we don't hear about it, but they're doing a lot of great work. So I encourage anyone who's experiencing this to also get in touch with Counterweight. Join the community for sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll link that below so people can find it. And yeah, I mean, just to add on, there's always this concept of there's the first few people to lead the way to kind of be renegades, and they have to be really brave and kind of solitary people. And then there's the people who are more prone to come after them, the second, wave. And by the time they come out, there will be more and more and more people following. So whether you're the first or not, just, I guess, realize that people will follow your lead. I mean, that's very powerful because we see that happening within the ideologies, that people are just following the leader or the group. And that's the safest thing to do. And I mean, I can't even really necessarily call it cowardice in all cases. It's strong social inclusion needs or just fear, very real fear for losing your job or your livelihood. So yeah, I guess that's what I would add. Just realize that you're not going to be alone in speaking up, even if you are in the moment, but people will follow.
Yeah, it's really the followers. Did you ever see that video that Derek Sivers? Well, he's a music person, or he was a music person. He's a business person, or he's an entrepreneur. He posted about there's a field at some like place where a bunch of people are picnicking, and there's like music playing, and this one person gets up and just starts dancing
I
crazily.
saw
And
that.
you see that? It's just so amazing, the analysis going on, the I don't know if it was subtitles or somebody speaking, but it's like, now look at this person. Like, are they a leader? No, not yet. And then it's the second person who then now you have a movement, right? One person's a whisper, the second person's a thunderstorm. Like, then it's really the second wave that makes the movement. And I thought that was really wise, that it wasn't anything really until it was actually the second person who made it into something. Because that takes bravery as well, for another person to stand up and say, I'm gonna be with that person who's out there
Right.
on the limb. It's almost more scary. It's like, oh my gosh, like everybody's looking at that person weird. I don't want to suffer the same fate.
Hmm.
That person's been outcast. I don't want to go do what they're doing. So the second, it's the followers that really make something happen.
Mm-hmm.
You saw
Yeah.
that, Colin.
I did, yeah. No, it was a great video. I don't think I didn't watch it with sound though, but it was fun to watch.
Oh yeah, because there was all this whole analysis about, look at this person, like what they're doing, and then was talking about the psychology of it.
Yeah, I think it's all true. I mean, that we just have a big collective action problem, but I mean, I think you see it too. There's more and more people that are sort of identifying and standing up. It seems like every week or every day we see someone else having a problem, they're standing up to it, and that just to me that just bodes really well for the next couple of years, because now we actually have a debate going, and it's been put into the public. And a few years ago, I mean, you never heard anyone say critical race theory before, except for in these really ensconced departments in universities and maybe among people like James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose on Twitter. But now it's a major national conversation, and I think we're going to win it, because whenever we have these public conversations, and if people can actually hear both sides, I can't imagine people not agreeing with us. I mean, it made me, especially with the biology stuff, the sex denial. To me, the critical race stuff, there's a whole lot of other social factors going in there, but I think my job is maybe a little easier because I don't think a lot of people need to be convinced that there's only two sexes. It's just sort of a plainly obvious thing, I think. So hopefully we can have these public conversations more.
I hope so
like
too.
this.
The difference between a society based on reason or a society based on magical faith, a faith-based society, or a reason and logic-based society. That's it's going to be one or the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was a very hopeful note to end on. And thank you both. I really enjoyed getting to talk to you. It was really fun to bring us all together. So really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Sasha.